Well, it turns out that Skyrim won the vote by 2 votes actually for the overall. No blue, no blue. But yes, I know I'm wearing blue. Blue, blue. Nobody's gonna get that one either. Um, I wanted to talk about 2 things really quick before I got started on Skyrim. Number one, there were several games that were requested that weren't actually on that list. I'm going ahead and adding them to the requested list now. That includes Neverwinter Nights 2, Morrowind, Metal Gear Solid 1 through 3, and someone requested Chrono Trigger. This is actually unrelated. I just found that amusing. I've already done a Chrono Trigger review, um, and I've said quite a bit about it in the review. I could probably do it again. It's Chrono Trigger. It's one of my favorite games of all time. But anyways, second thing is that several requests were for Fallout New Vegas. That was one of the most requested games, actually. Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2. Fallout New Vegas, as I mentioned before, I'm waiting on for now because I want to do another playthrough of it. I want to go through and actually do the independent storyline, and I haven't done any of the DLCs yet, and I do try to give a game a chance with the DLCs before I actually play it myself, or review it, rather. And so I want to actually do that before I actually give it a review and give it a fair chance, as I did with Fallout 3. The other thing to consider for Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2, while I am technically ready to go at those ones right now, I could do that review right now, tonight, because I played those very recently. I played them through just before Mass Effect 3, with all the DLCs, obviously. But I was hoping to put those off because I was going to do those right about when that DLC for Mass Effect 3 comes out in the summer, and then I was going to review Mass Effect 3 after that. Because, as several of you are probably aware, I never actually reviewed Mass Effect 3. I talked about the ending and several of the flaws the game had creatively, but I never actually reviewed the game because I did still say it was a positive game, and I would like to talk about why, at least briefly, and give them that chance with the new DLC that's coming out to see if they actually come out with anything. So I'm still torn. I might just do Mass Effect 1 and 2 and then wait for a while to do Mass Effect 3, because obviously I'm going to wait till the DLC anyways. We'll see. But for now, I'm definitely doing Skyrim, KOTOR, and Warcraft 3, and Baldur's Gate 2 will be the next ones in that order, because that was the order they requested. I'll post it here, the actual results of the vote. But let's talk about Skyrim, shall we? Now, I want to tell you a little bit of a story, if I may. I played Oblivion literally right before Skyrim came out. Literally the day before Skyrim came out, I finally finished Oblivion, Shivering Isles. But actually, no, I didn't. I did Shivering Isles before I finished the epic story. But the point being that the very last quest chain, the actual main quest chain of Oblivion, I had put off until I had done everything else, 100% of the game. And once I'd done that, I was level. God, I don't even remember. High, like 60 something. It was at the point at which I was technically only getting levels off of, athletics and whatnot. And as you may or may not be aware, the game scales to your level most things, including enemies. Did you know that the Emperor, right at the end there, when you have to escort him, the recently crowned, I guess he's not technically Emperor yet, Sean Bean, when you have to escort him to the light the Dragonfire, he is not scaled with you. That means I had the most epic last boss confrontation I've ever had in an Elder Scrolls, because I was level billion, and all the enemies were level billion and could one-shot him, Martin. By the way, Martin Septim is who I'm referring to. And they could literally one-shot him. Any of them could. And you know how many of those come out. There's quite a few of them. So I had an interesting situation. I had to redo that like 6 times, but I didn't mind because it felt epic. It was awesome. I was like, yeah! I was pumped. I was ramped. And when I finally pulled it off with this beautiful combination of reflecting, and I created a brand new spell for the situation. I was like, okay, I need to go back a few saves to the point where I can still go and make spells. Reflect, heal, and all that stuff on him, buff the heck out of him, run, oh god, I need to get the enemies before they get him, oh shoot, one got past me, I need to go get that one. It was awesome, I loved it. And I went from that level of epic to Skyrim, and it felt like kind of a letdown. Now, that's not necessarily the fault of Skyrim, because because obviously that was sort of indicative of the situation, but as I started thinking about it, I started realizing why that was occurring to me. And this is my first biggest point about Skyrim. Skyrim feels a little bit more like a world than a story. It's something Morrowind pulled off really well. Oblivion had a really solid story structure to it. It really had the main plot, and it was clearly and decisively the main plot here, right? And it was crucial, integral to what was going on. And while you could argue the same for Morrowind, Morrowind's main plot was more like this. Very tight-knit, very strong, but there was also a world there that had nothing to do with that. And you were just in the world, just exploring and enjoying yourself, and I really enjoyed that. And they're both good in their own right, but Skyrim was much more the latter. Skyrim's main plot didn't feel that epic to me. And I just want to take something, by the way, when I'm saying epic, I do not mean Michael Bay, I do not mean, Apocalypse or whatever the heck that movie was called, the Meteor one, what was that movie called? It doesn't matter. I'm not talking that. That's not what I mean when I say epic. What I mean when I say epic is something that is both awesome and personal and well done. The Lord of the Rings movies, if you want a direct example. That's what I'm talking about. Anyways, Skyrim's main storyline, here's my argument, or rather my statement. To me, the main storyline didn't feel like a main storyline. It felt like a storyline amidst several storylines. It felt like, that was your destiny and all, stopping Alduin, but that was one of your destinies, if you understand what I'm saying here. And several of the other storylines, you could make an argument were also a main storyline, or at least a primary storyline, a big storyline. The Mage and Thieves guilds popped immediately to mind, but the Dark Brotherhood, just as equally, surprisingly enough. I didn't think I was going to do the Dark Brotherhood at first, because I play a good character, and I decided to do it just to see, and I was surprised how much I enjoyed that storyline, and how well done it was, how well crafted it was, how personal it was. So, you understand what I'm saying. Nothing I'm saying here is negative, it's just interesting. The feeling you get from it is because if you feel much more like you actually are in a world, and you are in a setting that is actually evolving around you, rather than, you have a degree of a world and then there's the main plot. There was no main plot, in my opinion. That's what I'm really getting down to. It felt more like the adventures of the main character rather than the story of the Dragonborn, if you follow what I mean. The adventures of the Dragonborn rather than the story of the Dragonborn. And I actually really liked that. It was one of the reasons I really got into Skyrim so much. I think they pulled it off really well. So, that's my first point. Second point. It was, as I discussed briefly in my Q&A, one of the biggest things they did to change Skyrim from a fundamental perspective from the Elder Scrolls is they got rid of the Freeze the World code. This actually is really complicated. I'm not going to go into very much detail on this, but suffice it to say that in all Elder Scrolls games forever, when you interact with an NPC here, the entire world stops functioning, basically. All the physics stop, all the engines stop, all the calculations stop, everything just stops. Except for the guy you're talking to, who's still animated, and the interactions with him, and any of the scripts that are running behind the screen there. The rest of the world is completely frozen during that conversation. It was done that way on purpose, and they kept it that way for style reasons. They finally did away with it in Skyrim. One of my beliefs at the time, I don't know if this is true or not, because Bethesda is not making the MMO, but one of my beliefs was to segue into a multiplayer aspect, because that kind of code was something that would have to be solved for multiplayer to be possible, because you have to understand that's actually a core facet of the game, is the fact that the functions, all the code, all the engines of the world cease. They pause whenever you go into a conversation. You can't have that in multiplayer. And so the fact that everything keeps functioning while you're still talking with someone was a brand new idea, and I figured that was the reasoning for it, was so they could prep for multiplayer concept. I don't know if I'm true or not. I don't know if that's true or not, but it was an interesting thing, and it, whether I like it or not, I overall do like it. It did introduce a couple more problems than previously existed. For example, it's funny because both versions have their silly moments, let's be honest. For example, I could be running through a corridor at Mach 20 here, and here's the NPC I want to talk to, right? And so I come here, and I leap up, and I talk to him right here, and so I'm just kind of hovering here, and he just kind of looks up at me like, "Hello, stranger. What's going on?" And you're just hovering there. You're just frozen in midair talking to this guy as time has stopped. And it just kind of led to a silly moment. But the new method has its own silly moments. And one thing I actually had happen to me several times in Skyrim was I'm talking to a guy here. Pretend I'm the guy, actually. That would make it work. So I'm the guy. "Hey, what's going on? How are things?" And guy B over here just kind of starts walking by and just kind of starts shoving me over here. Excuse me. And then, So they were both kind of silly moments, but overall I think I prefer the new method better. It does give it more of a that in the world feeling, which really suits because Skyrim overall has more of a in the world feeling, and I really get that. Speaking of which, moving the setting north into Skyrim, the region, the name of the area is Skyrim for anybody who doesn't know, made perfect sense to me, and they really pull off that Nordic feel really well. I really enjoy it, of course, because it's the standard for Elder Scrolls games. All of them, especially from Morrowind to Skyrim, and the three. I know that it's always weird thinking about the Elder Scrolls. There's only been 5 games ever, not counting Fallout 3. That's just a weird thought. 5 games. That's the Elder Scrolls series, and yet they're all fantastic. Anyways, point is, Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim have all had extremely different feels to them. The atmosphere has always been very different. Morrowind always had the I don't even know how to explain it, to be honest. The high fantasy concept. Magic is prolific. The weird creatures and types and things, and just it was its own thing. It was its own little world over there on Vanderfall. Oblivion was very contemporary, very modern. Really had the imperial, the Cyrodiilic thing going on. It felt like civilization as opposed to Vanderfall. And of course, Skyrim feels like the Wild North, and you really get that concept of this being a rough and properly Nordic, properly. I don't even have a good word for it, to be honest with you. I'd call it barbarian, but that term has lost all meaning in the last 2,000 years. So I don't want to use that as a negatory, because quite the contrary. I mean it as a positive. It feels like, it feels barbaric in a good way. You know what I mean? And so I like that. I love that. I dig the atmosphere. I dig the atmosphere of Skyrim very much so. Now, it is worth noting that there are some flaws in that. And this is really hard to explain because I've had trouble explaining this to anybody, my friends, before, and I really have trouble laying out exactly what my problem was with the feel of Skyrim, and that is, it almost feels too dirty, if that makes any sense at all. I understand that was basically done on purpose, but for the setting and for the circumstances, for the time, it felt like, I don't know. It just struck me as almost too down to earth, if that makes any sense at all. And I'm not saying that is necessarily a negative thing, to be completely honest with you. It just isn't my thing. I prefer to not be down to earth. I get enough being down to earth every day of my life. But in Oblivion, the feeling was very much you are the guy. You are the champion of Cyrodiil, right? In Morrowind, you were the I can't think of the name all of a sudden. The Nerevarine. There we go. You were the Nerevarine. You were way up there. In Skyrim, you feel like this guy down here, and part of this is because of the setting feeling I mentioned earlier, because there is no primary plot line. I guess I could pull the cable back over. Because you've got this thing going on, rather than this thing. The feeling is much more down here, much more down to earth. You are one of the people, and I get that. And I understand that. It does add to the feeling, and I did enjoy it. I just didn't enjoy it as much as I would have if you had actually been the guy like you are in most Elder Scrolls games. That's just my opinion, of course. That's just what I like in an Elder Scrolls game. But moving on. Let's see. They one of the things I want to mention. They did a very good case, very good setup of presenting a situation in Skyrim where very few cases did you have someone who was truly in the right. Someone who was actually, there's the correct choice and there was the wrong choice. I mentioned a while ago, back in one of my Mass Effect videos, about the concept of proactive choices, or retroactive choices, I'm sorry. That's not really the best term to call it, but it's the term I've been calling it for a while now. Skyrim employed several of these, usually in small quests, to great effect, actually. And the best example I could give you right now is there's a quest in the first town, Whiterun, I believe? First city, actually, Whiterun. Whitehold. I can't remember the name of it. I'm retarded. But that first town, the first hold you come to, not the actual first village, but the first city, there's a woman who needs help from several bounty hunters who are coming to get her. And depending on which side you join, it changes which side was actually correct, because both of them tell you opposite sides of the story. Now, that is a circumstance of you were right both times, which is not necessarily always true in a retroactive choice. As I mentioned previously, it isn't always about always choosing, no matter what you choose, you're right. It's more about you yourself, by choosing, change history in choosing. That's what the real point is. But point being, they still pulled that off, and they did that several times. It was really well done. But that's that's not what I'm sorry for that little segue. I just wanted to talk about that. But one of the other things they pull off really well is the concept that I was just talking about, where nobody's actually correct. Let me give you the best example of this right off the top of the bat: the Civil War, which is which is like main plotline 3 over here. I got the dragons, we got the Thieves Guild, we got the Civil War. One of the main plot lines, one of the major threads cutting through the story of the setting, the world of Skyrim, and well, it's really funny because the rebels had a lot of really valid points and a lot of very valid reasoning to them, and for all intents and purposes were correct. And the Imperials had a lot of very valid points to them and a lot of good reasoning to them and were essentially correct. Both sides were basically right, and I loved it. I loved the fact that both sides were in the right and were fighting over a genuine dilemma. We're fighting over a difference in ideology rather than one is good and one is evil, or one is right and one is wrong. Now, you may ask which side I joined, because a lot of people ask me this question. Who'd you join? I joined the Imperials, and I can explain why in two reasons. One, with the Thalmor and the High Elves sitting right there ready to go again, we need to present a unified front, not be dividing our resources and losing men and time and money and everything fighting each other. We can go to Civil War later if you'd really like to, but for now, with the enemy right there, can we just join forces for now? I have the same problem with World of Warcraft. I want to slug half the people in the Alliance and the Horde, the NPCs, because they're both stupid. It's like, okay, guys, can we just join forces for now? Can we go beat the actual enemies? Deathwing's wiping out the planet. Can we go kill him rather than each other? But it's the same concept. That's the first reason. I think we should have presented a unified front. The second reason is because Ulfric, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, the leader of the rebels is, he is not in the right. While the rebels as a unit, as an organization, have very valid points to them and are more or less in the right, he is not. He is out for himself. He is out for his own glory, for his own power, for his own interest, and everything he said and everything how he said it just screamed to me that fact, and was just, yep, I'm out for me, and nowhere is this more exemplified when you have the, spoiler alert, the meeting with him and the Imperials when you're trying to force the two, really, to make peace. And he sits down and is like, all right, before we talk, I want this town. That's how he opens negotiations. Give me this town. What? And I don't know. It's just I hated that guy, and I couldn't wait to kill him, and I did, and it was awesome. So, but that's not the only case where that's done. Another excellent example of both sides are in the right was done with the Dark Brotherhood question. I'm not actually going to say what that was out here because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. It was a wonderful question. I do recommend you go through it, even if you're playing a good character. Because it was really well written, really well designed, and made a lot of sense, and flowed really well from the Oblivion Dark Brotherhood and the Oblivion storyline in general. And so, awesomeness, really well good. Speaking of which, another thing I want to talk about in Skyrim is they had a lot of really good continuity nods, rather than just kind of dovetailing things in like some people didn't do. All the actual continuity nods made sense. For example, the Wolf Queen incident with Berenzia. No, that's not her name. I can't think of her name. Anybody who's done that quest knows what I'm talking about. That's in the northwestern area of the town, whose name I can't think of. I apologize. It's very late. I'm actually going home very soon with how late it is. This review might actually be shorter because of that fact. But anyways, that quest, was a wonderful tieback, and as soon as I heard the name of who they were summoning, I was like, oh my god, really, her? Because, it made sense, and, the whole deal with the various the elves, including the Dunmer, and not the Dunmer, the Dark Elves, and the High Elves, and the Cave Elves, for lack of a better term. I can't think of any of the names right now, so I do apologize. But, the storyline all fit in and tied in the past really well. You got to encounter the one alchemist who did the... I can't think of it. Oh my goodness. The quest to find the Nirnroot, that was it. The Nirnroot quest. You find him, or rather his corpse, in Skyrim, and find out about how, because you helped him back in Oblivion, he really got on a kick there and came up to the north to Skyrim, like 100 years ago or whatever, or actually I think it was only about like 20 because he was an elf, so he's been alive this whole time. And he had this whole thing, the interactions with Lucius, in the Dark Brotherhood chain were very enjoyable, and I thought he was, while he was incredibly evil, it was still very appropriate, and it amused me, and I enjoyed that. Um, and there were several others, but suffice it to say that all of them made sense, all of them flowed very well, and I liked all of the little callbacks to the to the previous Elder Scrolls games. And it was more than just Oblivion too. They really went throughout the gamut here. Oh my goodness. The combat, as I've said before, one of the things that is important to do with a series is to make it so that the feel is always recognizably a blah, right? You can always recognize, you could until recently anyways, recognize a BioWare game because it always had that same basic top-down engine. I think it's the Infinity engine. I don't remember what they called it, actually, to be honest with you. But, the one they've been using since Baldur's Gate. It's just been modified over the years. Neverwinter Nights did it. Dragon Age did it. And, Elder Scrolls is the same thing. You can always, the moment you saw the Elder Scrolls Skyrim trailer, it was noticeably and recognizably Elder Scrolls. But what they did in Skyrim with the dual-wield combat thing, I really enjoyed. I thought that was an excellent addition to the game, rather than having caster mode and melee mode and all that. Just having this thing going on was awesome, and made for a beautiful number of combinations. I've played through Skyrim like 3 times at this point, and I know that's actually kind of small, but time as always. But the ability to have a heal over here and an attack spell over here, or a heal over here and a weapon over here, or maybe you're just using a bow and you switch back and forth between that and a double heal, so you can heal even more and faster. The number of combinations and the ability to do it basically however you wanted added to the different types of gameplay you could go through it, which is something I always enjoy. I really like it when you have that kind of option, the ability to say, oh, I want to play as a blah, or I want to play as a blah, and you can, and I like that. Speaking of additions to the thing, the crafting. Obviously, there's always been a degree of alchemy and enchanting, but the additional crafting that they did I thought was really well done, but it comes with a caveat. Here's the kicker. Crafting in the game, if you level up to, like, say, 40-ish or whatever, and you're doing the thing and you think, I really want some dragon armor, so I'm going to go back and craft. If you do that, you're probably going to find it's a little bit tedious and a little bit grindy, unless you've been saving everything you've gotten throughout the whole game, which is possible. A lot of people I know who play Elder Scrolls games are pack rats, myself included. But if you level it as you're leveling, you will not notice that tedium nearly as much. In fact, quite the contrary, it will flow very well. Your alchemy and blacksmithing and enchanting skill will generally be right about at the point where you are at in overall power. And I like that. I think that was extremely well done. I think it was well designed. The only catch is the tedium that gets into it if you go back and want to raise it at higher level. It was obviously designed to be done as you're leveling, instead of, well, now I want to pick up blacksmithing. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's just something that is worth noting. But it is also worth noting that you can basically become, how do I put this, the most invincible demi-deity of destruction if you take crafting, especially if you take all the crafting. And there's a few tricks involved. My favorite being make a potion to increase your blacksmithing, and you blacksmith a really good item. Or I'm sorry, no, that's not how you do it. You make a let's see. You make a potion to increase your enchanting. Then you make an enchantment to increase your potion making, and you do this back and forth until you get to the maximum. And there is a maximum. You'll reach a cap, and then at that point you make really good enchanted gear that increases your alchemy a lot, and then you put that on, and you make the really good alchemy that increases your enchanting a lot, and then you just swap between the two whenever you need to make anything alchemy or anything enchanting. And so then you could crank your blacksmithing up with both alchemy and enchanting, and then you could blacksmith the gods' weapons themselves, basically. And I kind of stumbled upon that myself. I believe it was a well-known strategy. I don't know. I don't look up in a game until I'm done with it, as I mentioned before. But that was actually rather amusing, and there was indeed an enjoyment factor of literally being able to walk into a series of mobs and have such high armor and have such powerful weapons that I could just stand there as they're beating on me like, yep. I guess I'll kill you. There was an enjoyment factor there. I probably wouldn't do that again if I were to do it again, obviously. But the one playthrough where I was just invincible was enjoyable, and I like that. I do have one additional comment to make, and that is the fact that the talent system, the whole, speaking of going into that, I actually do think that was well done. Being completely honest, if I was to be given Skyrim Perfect Edition, I would probably make a few tweaks, but there would be tweaks. There would be little things. Overall, the system I enjoyed, I liked. and I thought it flowed very well. I thought it worked really well. I think that's an excellent way to do leveling, is the perks in the stars, the talent trees, basically, rather than raising up your skills individually and getting the talents at milestones. I think that works really well. And of course, the fact that you're just going to look up into the stars and see things, that was very well presented. That's one of those things that's just flavor. It's just a little addition, a little addendum that makes it cooler. But I like that kind of thing. I like flavor, and I think that came out really well. So definite props there. Now, a couple other specific additions I want to go into. My personal favorite quest chain was the Thieves Guild chain. I really got into that. I really thought it was really probably the most personal, especially because it was one of the few quest chains that had a very definitive villain to it. Yes, you had Alduin, but you only interacted with him 3 times, well, 4 times technically, in the whole game, throughout the whole main quest chain. Whereas the main guy you interact with, whose name I can't even think of right now, in the Thieves Guild chain, you interact with constantly, even after you find out he's the villain, and you keep going from that point. And the only other one I can think of like that was the Dark Brotherhood, which is the other one I really enjoyed, where you had the captain of the guard there. But in both cases, the storyline was very personal. It really they pushed the envelope just a bit in storytelling, and if you've seen this quest, you know what I mean. It's not just talking heads, and it's not just cutscenes with 2 people talking to each other. They actually did events. They actually did things happening. My favorite example of this is in the Thieves Guild, where you beat the last boss and the water's flowing in, and you're in this cave, and she yells, "Oh, you need to find a place where we're going to drown," and you have to swim around, and eventually this crack hole opens up, and you're like, "Oh, thank God," because the place is just filling up with water, and you're going to drown in game terms if you don't. You have to swoosh out. Oh my goodness, thank goodness we made it. That was cool. That was awesome. I love that they did that, and they do that a lot. They did that in the Mage's Quest too, which is another excellent one, by the way, and I guess he did have a defined villain too, now that I think about that. The Mage did. The Mage storyline. And all of the main storylines felt really interesting, but one of the things I found fascinating was all the Daedric quests had a real polish to them. Even the ones that I found detestable. Let me be honest here. There were several Daedric quests which made me feel kind of not cool. Ill in some cases, or just whoa in some other cases, Let me give you an example of that. Whoops. Hair. One of the other examples of that is, I think it's the Boethia quest. I'm not actually 100% sure on that. It's the one where you have to bring a follower and then sacrifice them in order to start the quest. That's the start of the quest. And I was sitting there looking at that. I'm like, and the only reason I was doing it was because I was getting all the achievements, to be completely honest with you. Otherwise, I probably would have just skipped it. But I'm just sitting there, and I'm just like, okay. And I go into town, and I hire a mercenary. And my friend Gary is sitting here. He's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I need to hire a mercenary because I need to go sacrifice her to the dark doom of doom in order to start the quest." And he looks at me, and he just gives me this look that says, "You're evil." And I'm like, "What? I don't want to get rid of someone I actually know or like. I'll just pay her 500 gold, and she can go die." And he's like, "Oh my God, man." But, despite that, it was still a good quest. It was still interesting. It was still well developed, well written, well acted. And all the Daedric quests were. But, of course, my favorite, by far, was Sheogorath. Definitely an awesome quest, especially since it is confirmed in the quest and officially that the Sheogorath you are interacting with is you from back in Oblivion. Spoiler alert, I'm sorry, I probably should have said that first, but that is actually the player character from Oblivion, which is awesome, which is exactly what it should be. I thought that was great that they tied that in there. And of course, I really enjoyed. I can't think of the name of the Daedric lore, but it's the Drunk quest. Everybody knows about the Drunk quest, where you have to go through the chain and find out what happened while you were so stoned and smashed and whatever that you have no idea what happened. That was awesome. That was well done. And so on and so forth. I could keep going. All the Daedric quests were very well done. I really did enjoy all of them, both artistically speaking and as a player. I had nothing but props to say there. Now, all I've been saying is positive stuff. Do I have any actual complaints about Skyrim? Like I said, I do wish I felt a little bit more main, if that makes any sense. I felt more like the Mario rather than a down-to-earth guy. But that's a matter of preference. So I wouldn't actually list that as a complaint, personally. Other than that, there were some really amusing bugs I saw. I will never, as I said before, I'll never begrudge a Bethesda game, or a game of this length and scope and complexity for a bug. Or bugs, for that matter. I never had actually game-breaking bugs, but what happened to me? And I never figured out why. But every time I would map travel to this one spot, like if this is the camera here, you're seeing the camera angle right here, right? And I'd map travel in, and then this corpse of a person would just go flying, like rocketed. I'm not going to do it properly because I don't want to actually throw the phone, but it's literally just, whoosh, just goes flying across the screen and clatters with the mountain. And then I could map travel away and map travel back, and there's another corpse, whoosh, and I got to the point. The joke just kept going because I kept doing this like 8 times in a row, and I was like, Gary, come here, look at this, what, Whoa! And we theorized that what was happening is map travel is actually canon travel from Secret of Mana, and so every time I canon travel, I'm like, and the guy that's flying is the guy I'm landing on to soften my blow. So he goes, Whoa! And they keep being, okay, he's gonna travel again, get another guy in, and so it was hilarious. I loved it. It made me laugh for God, I don't know, like half an hour. Um, what else? But the problem is, and this is the kicker here. Honestly, having a complaint about Skyrim is not going to happen. To be completely honest, I do think Skyrim was an amazing game. I do think it was a 10 out of 10. I do recommend it to just about anybody. There are people who don't like games like that, RPGs of that type, who liked Skyrim, who played Skyrim, who bought Skyrim, having never played an Elder Scrolls before. I know someone personally who couldn't stand RPGs in general of any type, and he played Skyrim. It hit such a broad audience, and it did it so well. And while it had a lack of focus, it didn't need focus because the world was so vast and so well designed that it was massive. And speaking of which, if I did have one complaint, there's actually one thing. I wanted to mention this specifically. I actually forgot to mention this earlier. The game, the world, felt like it was designed around the concept of having a flying mount, or the ability to fly. It really did. There are actually mods out already to do this, which further supports my comment, because obviously the code supports it to some extent or another. But my point here is that I was expecting that the whole way, and I figured the main quest chain would be what unlocks the ability to fly. It just kind of made sense to me. And I got to the point where you talk to the one dragon, and he's like, would you like to journey with me to the spot? And I was like, yes. And he starts talking about how I'm going to get on his back and all that. And my first thought was, oh god, this is going to be it. This is going to be awesome. And then there was a loading screen, and then I was there. And I was like, no! And I was wrong, and I admit it. But I really did think they were going to do that. Maybe they were planning on it. I don't know, because the whole world, from a design perspective, really felt like it was built around the concept of you being able to fly at high levels, at some point in time. It was just built for it. I don't even know how to explain it properly, but the plains were sufficiently rolling, and there were so many mountains, and the vertical space of the world is gargantuan. It's huge, and even if just within the Skyrim realm, and so it really felt like that was something that could have or should have been added. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but there was one other thing I wanted to mention, and that was the fact that I love the fact that they finally really, how do I put this? Elder Scrolls Bethesda has always supported mods. That's always been a big deal, and it's always been one of the key features. Like I said, you can always recognize an Elder Scrolls game, right? One of the ways you can do that is because it has full mod support. They release an official mod kit for you to make mods with, and people, they've always supported that kind of thing. And Skyrim has taken that to the next step with the Steamworks thing. I don't actually remember what it's called specifically, but the ability, there's actually built-in functionality to Steam to go through Steam and download and browse and upload and do all that mods. It's actually supported by Skyrim, by Elder Scrolls, by Bethesda mods. They finally took that last step and they made it officially supported, something most companies don't do. Very few companies have ever done, for that matter. And I love that. I thought that was awesome. I thought that was a fantastic step. I'm not even surprised they pull it off. In fact, I'm not even surprised they did that with Valve, of all people, because Valve would be completely on board with that, and as they were, for that matter. So, while I still go to the Nexus, which, by the way, if anyone's curious, the TES Nexus is where you get most of the really good mods, and some of the really bad ones too. But while I still go to the Nexus to browse, I also go through the Steamworks in order to look for mods there. And in fact, whenever I pick up Skyrim again, I'm going to be doing both in order to really get that and get the official mods as well as the unofficial ones. I just think that's awesome that they actually supported that. Now, I do apologize. I could talk about Skyrim a lot more. I really could, but unfortunately, I'm just running out of time. And so, the last thing I want to cover really briefly is the idea that the Elder Scrolls games have hit a plateau. And I've heard this concept thrown around a lot. I mentioned in one of my previous reviews, my Diablo 3 one, the idea that people, in my opinion, are complaining too much, to be honest with you, about everything, but especially about video games. And so I really wish, unlike that, I'm actually rather optimistic. As I said before, rather honestly and rather openly, I don't think we're in a dark age of gaming. I think we're coming out of a dark age of gaming. I think we're on an upswing. I think games are getting great again. And I think that it's going to continue doing that for a while. We're going to have another rise, another golden age. That's just my opinion, but that does seem to be what we're trending towards. And I don't think the Elder Scrolls series have plateaued at all. I'm not sure why people say that. Maybe people think because I know a lot of people were complaining about the console support. I can't I can't comment on that personally, obviously, because I played it on the PC. But I do know that there were some serious console issues with the porting, and that's not good, obviously. But I can't comment on that because I don't know the details. I never really looked into it. So maybe that's why everyone was saying it was plateauing. I don't know, but I do know that Skyrim is an amazing game, and I do think Skyrim was better than Oblivion, and I do think Oblivion was overall better than Morrowind. Now, of the three, which one had the most personal, the most emotional impact to me was Morrowind. But whether that's because that was the first truly immersive, I guess is the word I want to use, game I really played, or maybe it's just because of the fact that Morrowind pulled off not just the world setting like Skyrim does, but rather than be down to earth, was up here like I wanted. In other words, the complaint I said earlier about how I was so down to earth, the pseudo complaint about how I was so down to earth in Skyrim, and I'm in a setting, a world that doesn't really have one decisive plot, the story. Morrowind already did that. Except you weren't down to earth. You were up here, and you were the Nerevarine. You were the chosen one. You were, whatever, the Vault Dweller, and I liked that. And so it is possible that one of the reasons I consider Morrowind most fondly of the three, and I just kind of grin whenever I hear the music, is because of the fact that Morrowind already did what I considered the optimal balance as far as story and setting and concept like that. But that being said, I do think Skyrim is a superior game, and I do think Skyrim did a lot of things, and I did think it did a lot of things better, a lot of things well, and everything it added, I am in favor of. Everything they changed, I am okay with, or at the very least tolerate. Actually, I can't think of anything in the tolerate range, but I'm just saying that to cover my bases. But you get the point across. I don't think the Elder Scrolls has plateaued. I think if they ever do an Elder Scrolls 6, it's going to be amazing. Now, I don't know if... Now, here's a very interesting question, though. Are they going to do an Elder Scrolls 6? Or are they going to instead push the ESO thing? The question here is actually what is Bethesda going to do? The Bethesda developer, the studio themselves. Because they're not really doing ESO. They might be consulting for it, but they're not actually making it. What are they going to be doing? It is actually very probable and indeed possible with the rights issue now resolved with regards to Fallout, that Bethesda is going to go back to the Fallout series and do another Fallout game, whether it's an MMO or it's the much-awaited Fallout 4. Who knows? But that is very likely from a development perspective of what they're going to do next. So, again, the question is there going to be an Elder Scrolls 6? I personally think there is. I just think we're probably a little bit away from it, a ways away from it. But it would be really nice to see, and do I think it's going to be superior to Skyrim? Yeah, actually, to be completely honest with you, I think they will push the envelope again, because that's what they do. And I will give them credit on two things on this, if you'll forgive me for talking for just a little bit longer here. One, they have a marketing campaign I could go with. They're probably on the outside of the marketing campaign. And by that I mean they usually announce games a year in advance. I think a year is probably just a little bit too much, personally. But it is worth noting that the game is basically done by the time they announce it. They're ready to go, and they're just polishing it. So, okay. I would rather they did it more like at the 6-month line, or the 3-month line, or the 2-day line. 2-day line would be ideal, I think. One day to be like, yeah, and one day to buy it. But that's just me. But, regardless, they do, they were like, all right, Elder Scrolls 5, November 11th, 2011, Pukung, it's coming out, and it's going to be awesome. And I was like, yeah. And I watched that video like 15,000 times. I don't even know how many times I watched that trailer. Oh my goodness. And, So I like their marketing strategy, and I do like their development cycle concept, and that is, we will work on it until we think we're satisfied that it's done. The Blizzard concept is actually what that's usually called. It'll there's no ETA for it coming out. It'll come out when it's done. Some people might argue Diablo 3 contradicted that. I actually disagree, but not going into that because that's Diablo 3. That's not Skyrim. So, the Blizzard concept, it'll come out when it's done. Bethesda's always been very good about that. They've never rushed to make a deadline, and I think that's fantastic. I think it's awesome. Now, I do unfortunately have to get going. I'm sorry for the somewhat short review, but I have nothing but good things to say really about Skyrim. It is a magnificent game. If you haven't played it, I strongly recommend you play it and pick it up. I strongly recommend you really enjoy that concept, if you haven't before, of just living in the world of Skyrim, in the setting, in the region, in the district, whatever you want to call it. The province of Skyrim is this vast open plain, and it's wonderful to do nothing but just I never fast traveled until the very end of that game. And you know why? Because I loved going over that next hill and seeing what was over there. And I didn't actually mention this, did I? Really quick. One thing Skyrim did very well was they added a degree of randomization to it, rather than having a set manual thing like Oblivion did or Morrowind did. Everything is always laid out from the beginning. You could get a quest or go to an area, and it would randomly decide, okay, well, that's going to be this area, or there's going to be a camp here, or whatever. And there was a degree of randomness to it. Once a degree of dynamicness to it. Once you got there, it was set in stone. This is now this camp, or this is now this tomb. But up until that point, it was still potential. And so on subsequent playthroughs, speaking as someone who's played through Skyrim 3 times, each time I would go over that hill and there would be something different there. I'm sorry, I loved that. I loved the exploration of it. I loved going and being like, oh, this is so cool. And I loved going to the top of a mountain peak and just being like, oh, now that's a view. That is awesome. And then, of course, leaping off and plummeting to my death. But, I really did enjoy the explorative, the world feel of Skyrim. I think it pulled that off beautifully. Everything Morrowind did in that sense and more. And so I give nothing but my props to this game, and I encourage anybody who hasn't played it to play it and enjoy it all evermore. And I look forward to enjoying it again myself, especially when Dawnguard comes out, which I know I haven't commented on, but that's because I don't know anything about it. I know it's named Dawnguard. I know it's being showcased at E3. That's about what I know. So we'll see. I probably will do another feature review whenever I get the DLCs done. So I need to get going. I'm sorry. So I'll talk to you guys later. Hopefully I'll get this uploaded before David shows up.